Now, I don't know about y'all, but it sure seems to me that time is passing really, and I mean really fast. My gosh, it seems like just yesterday the trees were green and the temperature was hot and the mountaineers were just starting their season. And now the trees are yellow, red, and orange, and the temperature is cool enough that I have to wear a jacket when I take Coco for a morning walk. And unfortunately, it looks like the mountaineer season is just about over, at least until basketball starts. But be that as it may, since today is the last Sunday in October, we're finishing up this series dealing with how we might better live our faith. And over the last few weeks, we've talked about 3 things that we might consider doing. For example, we looked at how we might make an intentional effort to love everybody in our Christian family, something that we can all do, especially since we're able to be loving and kind even to folks we don't particularly like. And then we considered how our decision to obey the commandments of God can also show faith. Because let's face it, if we have the power to choose, we're only going to obey someone we really trust. And then last week we talked about how faith is shown by our willingness to make a difference within the world around us. In other words, to work with others to make where we are a better place to live. Now, that's what we've already covered. And this morning, as we tie up this series, we're going to consider how our determination to bring in the harvest can also show others the one we trust. And as we've done in the past, we'll approach this by asking 3 questions. First, what does it mean to bring in the harvest? Second, how can we be prepared to do it? And third, why can this be a demonstration of our faith? Now, that's what we'll be doing this morning. And so, when we talk about bringing in the harvest, what does it mean? Well, I'll tell you, if you were around last month when we looked at those seedy parables in Mark, you probably already have a pretty good idea about what this harvest business is all about. I mean, Jesus talked about it all the time. But if you weren't here back then, just listen to the first story we looked at, the parable of the soils. Now listen. A farmer went out to scatter seed in a field. While the farmer was scattering the seed, some of it fell along the road and was eaten by the birds. Other seeds fell on thin, rocky ground and quickly started growing because the soil wasn't very deep. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and dried up because they did not have enough roots. Some other seeds fell where the thorn bushes grew up and choked out the plants. So they did not produce any grain. But a few seeds did fall on good ground where the plants grew and produced 30 or 60 or even 100 times as much as were scattered. You see, even though the farmer knows that some of his seeds will never be productive, he also knows that the harvest is certain. Of course, Jesus explained exactly what that harvest was all about when he said this to his disciples. The seeds that fell on good ground are people who hear and welcome the message. They produce 30 or 60 or even 100 times as much as was planted. And so the harvest involves people who hear and welcome the message of God's grace. That's one thing we learned. And we also learned that it was God who made the seeds grow. Man, even a farmer who's ignorant and makes up for it by being lazy ends up with a harvest. Causing plants to grow, well, that's God's work. But it's still the responsibility of the farmer to get out into the fields and to bring in the harvest when the time is right. And this is what Jesus had in mind when this happened, and at least I think it is. When he saw the crowds, he felt sorry for them. They were confused and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. He said to his disciples, a large crop is in the fields, but there are only a few workers. Ask the Lord in charge of the harvest to send out workers to bring it in. Now, that's what he said. And so we know a few things about the harvest right now. One, as a result of what he's done, it has to do with people coming to some kind of awareness, some kind of knowledge of God, right? And 2, when the harvest is ready, it's going to be our job to bring it in. In other words, to help people as they struggle with this new understanding. And 3, since the harvest time may be different depending on the crop and the location, we really need to be ready all the time because we just don't know when we'll be needed. It's a lot like what Jesus taught about his return. He said, so be on your guard. You don't know when your Lord will come. Homeowners never know when the thief is coming. They are always on guard to keep one from breaking in. Always be ready. You don't know when the Son of Man will come. And so according to Jesus, the harvest represents people coming to know God, His mercy, and His compassion and His love. And even though it's a result of God causing the seed to grow within their minds and their hearts, we, and I'm talking about we as His followers, we need to be ready to help these tender, young, growing believers understand and to bring them into God's family. You see, that's what I believe the harvest is all about. But then, how do we do it? I mean, knowing what it is all well and good, but how can we be the kind of workers God needs to go out into the field to bring in His harvest? In other words, how can we be ready to help people who've already been touched and changed by God? I mean, God has planted the seed, and we've been watching it growing. How can we be ready to show them the peace and the joy that comes from living in His kingdom? Simply put, how can we do it? Well, again, I really think this involves two things. I mean, first, I believe it's important to be alert. And I'm talking about alert to the people around us. And that just makes sense. Man, we're not going to see the folks whom God has led into our lives. People who are ready to hear about the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit. I'm talking about brothers and sisters whose eternal destinies are in the hands of God. They just don't know it yet. Man, we're never going to see them if we're not looking. And if we need a reminder of where they might be, just listen to what Jesus said. Then the king will say to those on his right, my Father has blessed you. Come and receive the kingdom that was prepared for you before the world was created. When I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was a stranger, you welcomed me. When I was naked, you gave me clothes to wear. When I was sick, you took care of me. When I was in jail, you visited me. Then the ones who please the Lord will ask, when did we give you something to eat or drink? When did we welcome you as a stranger or give you clothes to wear or visit you when you were sick or in jail? The king will answer, whenever you did it for any of my people, no matter how unimportant they seemed, you did it for me. Man, if we're serious about bringing in the harvest, first we need to be alert. And second, we also need to be prepared. Just like an ancient farmer needed a scythe and rake to bring in the sheaves, we also need to be prepared to do what God has called us to do. Of course, this preparation may involve a lot of different things. For example, if we want to share the good news, it would seem to be a good idea to know something about what the good news actually is, which may mean reading the Bible every now and then or attending some kind of study. And I think it certainly involves going to God in prayer and offering praise during worship. But I'll tell you, I think the most important thing we can do is to decide that we're going to obey the commandments of Christ. And what commandments am I talking about? Just listen. Teacher, what's the most important commandment in the law? Jesus answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. This is the first and most important commandment. The second most important commandment is like this one. It is, love others as much as you love yourself. All the law of the prophets and the books of the law of Moses and the books of the prophets are based on these two commandments. Now that's what Jesus taught. And if we're a little fuzzy on what love actually means, just listen to the Apostle Paul. Love is kind and patient, never jealous, boastful, proud, or rude. Love isn't selfish or quick-tempered. It doesn't keep a record of wrong that others do. Love rejoices in truth, but not in evil. Love is always supportive, loyal, hopeful, and trusting. Love never fails. You see, along with being alert, we can be prepared, and that's how we can be ready for the harvest. And of course, that leaves us with the last question. Why? Why is this a way we might live our faith? Well, again, I think it comes down to two things. First, it demonstrates our focus. And I've got to tell you, I think that's a real challenge nowadays because we're buried by things that demand our attention. And I think you all know what I'm talking about. Of course, there's all kinds of stuff that can distract us from being loving people. Everything from anger to lust to greed. But maybe because we're so close to Halloween, I believe fear can also distract us. And those fears seem to change as we grow older. For example, I know that what I feared as a kid is a lot different than what I fear now. I mean, back then it was either the monsters who lived under my bed or simply getting caught by mom or dad. Those were my big fears. But now, well, they're more complicated, especially when I look at myself and my future. As a matter of fact, maybe the thing that scares me the most is found in my favorite poem, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. Now, it's important to know that in the poem, Prufrock was a man who said he could measure out his life with coffee spoons, and who believed he should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floor of silent seas. That was his life. But then at the end, or maybe because of all this, at the end he says this: I grow old, I grow old. I shall wear the bottoms of my trousers rolled. Do I part my hair behind? Do I eat a peach? I will wear white flannels and walk upon the beach. I have heard the mermaids singing each to each. I do not think they will sing to me. Fear can be a powerful distraction. But the ability to focus on God and neighbor, man, that shows real faith. And second, so does humility. And I'm talking about the ability to move past ourselves, what we think and what we want and what we feel. It's like Paul wrote to the Romans. Ask God to bless everyone who mistreats you. Ask Him to bless them, not to curse them. When others are happy, be happy with them. And when they are sad, be sad. Be friendly with everyone. Don't be proud and feel you are smarter than others. Make friends with ordinary people. Don't mistreat someone who has mistreated you, but try to earn the respect of others. And do your best to live at peace with everyone. Now that's humility. And I'll tell you, only humble people can accept that the harvest is really all about God, not us, and can be alert and prepared to do what God has called them to do. Because it shows focus and humility. You see, that's why I think being ready for the harvest is a wonderful way to show faith. And so there it is. 4 ways to live faith and trust. And when you think about it, none of the 4 are really hard to do. I mean, we're all certainly able to love one another. And we're capable of obeying God's commandments and of working together to make a difference in our world. And let's face it, we can all be ready for the harvest simply by being alert and prepared. Because through our focus and humility, we live our faith. And so it's possible. But it's not going to happen until we decide to do it. And next week, as we move towards Thanksgiving, we'll look at 4 different ways we can express our thanks to God for all the blessings He's given us. Amen.